Sorry?
Where does the responsibility sit for too many civilians dying?
Again...
UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak informed members of Parliament at a liaison committee that an excessive number of civilians are dying in Gaza. However, he deflected questions regarding whether Israel had violated international humanitarian law or was responsible for the death toll. This tense exchange with Alicia Kearns, chair of the Conservative Foreign Affairs Select Committee, ignited widespread unrest across the UK.
Too many innocent civilians have died, and
so
we've
therefore
been very...
you agree that the targeting is indiscriminate, therefore, if too many civilians have died?
I'm not privy to the precise targeting, but what I can say is clear that too many innocent people have died in this conflict.
But you will have received advice from government lawyers and submissions. Have any of those submissions, or any advice you've received from lawyers, or anyone within Number 10, suggested that international humanitarian law is being broken?
No, again, government never comments on the legal advice it receives.
So forgive me, though.
What we will always do.
But forgive me, Prime Minister, your current Foreign Secretary, when he was Prime Minister, was quite happy to state when he felt that international humanitarian law was being broken in Syria. Equally, James Cleverly's Foreign Secretary was happy to say that war crimes are taking place in Ukraine. So surely there is a precedent that you are able to say, if you believe that too many civilians are dying, that bombings have been indiscriminate, and therefore that the principles of necessity and proportionality are not being upheld.
You're putting words in my mouth. Others may have said that.
No, your exact words were too many civilians are dying. You've just repeated it here as well.
Yes, and now too many civilians are dying. Of course, too many civilians are dying. That is different from saying humanitarian law has been broken.
So
every civilian, quite
where is
frankly,
the responsibility for too many civilians dying?
Every civilian dying is a tragedy.
But where does the responsibility sit for that decision making?
Sorry?
Where does the responsibility sit for too many civilians dying?
Again, ask Hamas why they embed themselves in civilian populations. I think that's genuinely an extraordinary question.
After this clip was aired, numerous pro-Palestinian supporters took to the streets to raise concerns about the matter.
Protesters from across the country gathered in London.
The good people of this country want a ceasefire, and they want the arms trade to Israel to come to an end. The good people of this country want peace, and generally I'm disgusted to be British because of the politicians, but when I come here today and see such a diversity of people from all faiths and all backgrounds, it makes me proud to be British.
Saturday's demonstration was the 15th since last October. In recent months, dozens of UK university campuses have seen pro-Palestine encampments spring up, and public opinion has swung strongly behind a ceasefire.
The people of the UK are becoming increasingly aware of the empty promises and falsehoods propagated by those in power. These sentiments are part of a larger movement that will shape the future of the country.
People that weren't sure about it are now understanding what's happening, they're learning, they're asking questions. At my workplace, I've been asked questions. People want to know. I'm a teacher, and children want to know. And I think it's inspiring.
This might just be the latest in a series of pro-Palestine marches, but here in Britain, we're in the middle of a general election campaign. These demonstrators know it's an ideal time to make their voices heard.
But Rishi Sunak isn't the only one with his back up against the wall. The Labour Party is expected to form the next government following the next month's general election. Its leader, Keir Starmer, is anticipated to pledge recognition of a Palestinian state. However, his perceived hesitance to support a ceasefire in Gaza has negatively impacted Labour's popularity in some areas with large Muslim communities.
Just want to remind viewers of what you said to Nick Ferrari on LBC shortly after the October the 7th catastrophe. Let's have a look.
I'm very clear. Israel does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate, cutting off power, cutting off water. Well,
I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation.
Cutting off water, cutting off power. Now, you lost a lot of support when you said that.
I'm really glad you played the whole clip, so thank you for that, because when I said does have that right,
yes,
I was referring to the right to self-defence. So I was having a conversation about self-defence. I was not suggesting they had the right to cut off water or food. They do not have that right. I managed to have the opportunity to clarify that pretty quickly.
Labour is looking at the electoral map and knowing there are some key constituencies that they may lose.
So we have to keep the pressure up before the election and after the election.
Across the Channel, thousands of people took to the streets of Paris in solidarity with Palestine. Just like here in the UK, they're determined to keep marching until the killing in Gaza comes to an end.
Not only was Keir Starmer evading the question, but many influential shadow ministers also appeared to be doing the same.
Do you think cutting off food, water and electricity is within international law?
I think that Israel has an absolute right to defend itself against terrorism.
That's not the question I asked.
It is an answer to the question that you've asked, and I think it's an appropriate one at this time.
The UN Human Rights Commissioner says the imposition of sieges that endanger the lives of civilians is prohibited under international humanitarian law. Keir Starmer, your leader, a human rights lawyer, says Israel does have the right to impose a siege. Who is right?
In situations of war, where there are allegations of war crimes, that must ultimately be a matter for the UN and its agencies and for the ICC. No. I'm sorry, Victoria, that is the case.
Keir Starmer says Israel has a right to impose a siege.
I don't...
Who is right?
Keir Starmer has said right from the beginning that any war, it's important that democracies uphold the rules-based order and that must be within international law.
Do you think Israel breached international law by cutting off water and power supplies?
Look, I think this is an extraordinarily complex and fast-moving situation. There are 200 hostages.
And what's the answer to the question?
Well, look, Israel has the right to self-defence and it has a duty to secure the release of its hostages.
Sure. But my question was,
international law is upheld.
Right, and so my question is, do you think Israel has breached international humanitarian law by cutting off water and fuel supplies?
Well, in the last 24 hours, we've seen water, medicine and food enter Gaza.
I am going to ask the question again. Do you think Israel breached international law by cutting off power and water supplies?
Look, I'm not going to sit in your studio and grandstand and tell you that I'm going to make big pronouncements about what Israel is and isn't doing.
Keir Starmer was not the only one evading the issue. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak also had comments about the situation.
Mr. Speaker, last night, as Tory MPs were once again fighting amongst themselves, the public were sat at home watching John Irvine of ITV News report on footage from Gaza of an unarmed Palestinian man walking under a white flag, being shot and killed by the IDF. Prime Minister, such an act constitutes a war crime, does it not?
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, we've been absolutely consistent that international humanitarian law should be respected and civilians should be protected. I've made that point expressly to Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the Foreign Secretary is in the region this week making exactly the same point.
Stephen Clay. Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to rise to that dispatch box and tell the people of these Isles and elsewhere that shooting an unarmed man walking under a white flag is a war crime. Now, in recent weeks, this House has acted with urgency and intent following an ITV drama. The question is, will this House now show the same urgency and intent following this ITV news report? And finally, back a ceasefire in Gaza.
Mr. Speaker, no one wants to see this conflict go on for a moment longer than necessary, and we do want to see an immediate and sustained humanitarian pause to get more aid in and, crucially, the hostages out, helping create the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire. I set out the conditions for that earlier in the House. The Foreign Secretary is in the region today and will continue to press all our allies and partners to make sure that we can bring about that outcome.
It appears that the UK has become entangled in this conflict and is attempting to cover its tracks. What will happen now that both running parties have similar thoughts on the same matter? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For more unbiased British immigration policy updates and visa news, click here to watch Unbiased UK.